Coming up next on WNIN Lawmakers, the Indiana General Assembly is just past the halfway mark now. Indiana State Representative Ryan Hatfield joins us to discuss how things are shaping up. WNIN Lawmakers starts right now. Welcome to WNIN Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson, news manager and local host of WNIN FM's Morning Edition. Before we check in with Representative Hatfield, here's a report from Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith on what happened in the General Assembly this past week.
Legislation headed for the full Senate creates a crime for a person who encroaches on a 25-foot bubble after being told to stop by a police officer who is engaged in their duties. Supporters say it's about keeping police and the public safe, but opponents worry it's too vague and could be abused. The 21st Century Scholars Program covers full tuition at state colleges and universities for low-income students, but only about half of eligible students enroll, in part because you must do so by the end of 8th grade. Proposed legislation heard in a Senate committee this week would automatically enroll students while offering the ability to opt out. And the list of expenses a court can order biological fathers to cover 50% of around childbirth could grow to include items like cribs, clothing, blankets, and more. Some lawmakers expressed a desire in committee this week to give those fathers more of a say in the purchase of those expenses. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
We're joined now by Indiana State Representative Ryan Hatfield, whose district encompasses a large portion of Evansville. Legislator Hatfield, thank you so much for being with us.
Good to be here.
Good to have you with us. Well, let's start with some of the things that we just heard Brandon sharing with us there. House Bill 1186 would criminalize bystanders being within 25 feet of a police officer once the officer has asked them to stand down. Now, you voted against that bill, but it did pass the House and has now moved to the Indiana Senate. What are your concerns about that bill?
You know, I was concerned about the language, the way that it was written, but also as a former prosecutor, I voted against it primarily because I believe the police have the tools that they need to keep a perimeter around a scene, and I didn't like that it allowed for the 25 feet to be undescript, that the police already have the ability to set up a perimeter and to keep people behind that perimeter. I've been involved in investigations in which that were true and believe that they have the tools necessary to keep people away. And worried that this would be used to criminalize family members who were simply trying to get answers or concerned. But let me say, it does highlight a problem and a concern of mine, which is police need to be able to do their job. And we need to hold them accountable to do that job correctly. But they need the ability to do it in the heat of the moment, if you will. And so I would encourage everybody that when there's an active investigation going on, let's give the police a little bit of room. Certainly, I'm a big supporter of it. It's okay to film what's going on or to be there to make sure that everybody, police and non-police, are all doing the right thing and to help community members relax and realize that they need to do their investigation and to make sure that everybody involved is safe and secure and that we get the investigation and the evidence that we need to know what happened and to get to the truth. And so I stand with the police in that sense, that we want to make sure they're able to do their job and collecting evidence and investigating crime.
Brandon mentioned in his report that some legislators thought it was a little too vague. Is that a fair assessment of the way you feel?
That's right. So the current law already allows them to set up a perimeter and to keep people behind that perimeter. This simply allowed them to ask you to step 25 feet away, and if they didn't feel that you were 25 feet away, allow you to charge them with a crime. And so I would have preferred that we use the tools we already have. There are 4 or 5 or 6 crimes that would have been relevant in these investigations, in these scenarios, and so I believe we already have the tools necessary.
All All right, well, let's move on to the 21st Century Scholar Program. There have been some proposed changes to increase participation. First, for our listeners, our viewers, could you explain what the Scholar Program is and what these potential changes might be?
You know, 21st Century Scholars is an opportunity created by Evan Bayh's administration to get more children into college and to help fund the expenses of college and to ensure that no matter who you are or where you come from or what your parents did or how much money they made, that you have a pathway to college. My wife was a 21st Century Scholar and took an opportunity to go to college due to that program. And Representative Earl Harris, a Democrat from Lake County, passed the bill in the House that will expand and qualify every kid to ensure that you don't have to simply fill out just paperwork, and we don't divide our children based on who had the wherewithal to fill out the application or not. If you meet the threshold, you're eligible and can take advantage of that program.
All right, well, let's also move on to another bill that we heard in Brandon's report, and that is House Bill 1009. It would increase the father's mandated contributions toward expenses due to childbirth. It passed the Indiana House almost unanimously. Obviously, you voted in favor of it. Why?
I did vote in favor of it, and I'll tell you why. Because I just had my third child, and having a child's expensive. And you know, I'm very lucky that my wife and I planned for that, and were able to pay those expenses with the help of our insurer and provider. But you know, if a woman gets pregnant and doesn't have the same scenario, and perhaps they haven't planned for those expenses, or the pregnancy was unexpected in some way, or the father is not participating in that pregnancy or contributing financially, we want to make sure that fathers are on the hook too. This is very much mother and a father, and two people who make this happen and who should be on the hook for the expenses, because let me tell you, it's expensive, and the expenses add up, and they're not just at the hospital, but in prenatal care, prenatal vitamins, and ensuring that you're doing all the things that you need to do to make sure that the pregnancy is good and safe and healthy, and to make sure that the baby is good and safe and healthy. And so I thought it was important that fathers contribute.
Now, I understand that under current law, fathers do have to contribute 50% in prenatal things. How would this change that exactly? Would this make them contribute more after the birth?
This allowed for expenses to be paid prior to the birth. And so my understanding of current law is that once the child is born, you can recoup those expenses. This would allow you to start that action sooner.
I got you. All right. Well, let's move on to the budget bill. Obviously, this is a budget session. It has passed the Indiana House. You voted against it. Perhaps, I'm sure you could tell us why you did not support the bill.
Well, I generally like to see what the final product is in the budget. I thought that our funding of public schools was not sufficient given the increases in non-traditional schools. Non-traditional schools saw incredibly high increases, while public schools saw much lower increases. For this area, we saw some of the lowest increases in the state, and so the EVSC, children in Evansville, people in my district won't see the benefits at non-traditional public schools or non-traditional schools, or even private schools. Money put into vouchers as well. Those all saw extremely high increases in their funding, and so primarily around education, I just felt that we needed to step up and continue to fund our public schools, where over 80% of our children are educated, and make sure that our teachers are respected and those kids have the same opportunities as elsewhere in the state.
Now, as I understand it, there were teacher salary increases and such, but not big enough for your support.
This budget didn't go quite as far as I had hoped. You know, sometimes the minority party doesn't vote for the budget, and 2 years ago I made the decision to go ahead and support it, because I thought that the majority party, along with the minority party and Greg Porter out of Indianapolis had really come to a good place on education funding. I think this is a step back and think that we need to do better around public education. We got a long way to go. We got 7 weeks left, and I'm hopeful that the final budget will be a little bit better.
So obviously time for more changes.
That's right.
Okay.
If I could, John,
Sure.
I'll just step in there. I also would like to see additional funding in the mental health space. To the majority party's credit, they've done some. In fact, they added $1 million. We're sitting on a $6 billion surplus, and we have a mental health crisis in the state, and so I hope the final budget will have more funding for mental health as well.
Anything else you'd like to see in the budget that isn't there now or isn't as big an expenditure as you'd like to see?
You know, I mentioned mental health, but healthcare across the state, our outcomes are lag behind the rest of the Midwest. In fact, they lag around most of the country, and so I'd like to see us invest in public health outcomes, everything from preventative care to prenatal care to our maternal health care and mortality rate is amongst the highest in the nation. We need to do more to protect mothers and babies in those vulnerable times.
All right. Well, let's move on to a bill, a Senate Bill 473. Legislators from the Evansville area have coalesced support around it. It addresses discharges into the Ohio River. I believe you're familiar with this. Could you explain what that bill would do?
Yeah, it is important for the Evansville Water and Sewer and to ensure that our water is safe, and would provide additional security measures around what discharges go into the Ohio River. Clearly, we're a river town, very proud of being a river town, as we can see around us here. And so we want to make sure the water we have coming into Evansville Water and Sewer and into our water system is safe, and that we at least know what's in it so that we can treat those products. And I have had and passed through the House last year a spill bill that would nicely correspond with this bill, which simply says if a company or a business spills into our waterways, they have to notify the water company of what they spilled. And you would think that wouldn't be controversial. I haven't been able to get that through the Senate yet, but this bill is a step in the right direction in protecting Evansville's water.
All right, well, let's move on to a bill that is controversial, I think it's safe to say. Senator Jim Tom's Senate Bill 12 regarding material harmful to minors passed the state Senate. It's been referred to the Education Committee in the Indiana House. Some have called it book banning, some have called it protecting minors. What are your thoughts on that measure?
You know, I'm a big supporter that our school boards, our parents, our teachers, our librarians, and our students are capable of deciding what should be in their libraries. I don't find that we have big groups of parents that want to put pornographic material into our elementary schools, and I think that this bill goes too far and would ban some classical books that we all grew up reading and enjoying. And you know, if there's an example out there of a book or two, which I say a book or two because so far the example has been one book, but if there is a library out there with a book that maybe is a step too far, I believe we have a system in place with our school boards, parents, teachers, PTAs, and students that would allow for us to address those concerns and move on.
All right, well, let's move on to some other bills that have certainly got a lot of attention. You're on the Public Health Committee that's slated to consider Senate Bill 480. It would prohibit gender transition procedures for minors. It would also prohibit referrals for those procedures. It does allow for some exceptions. Have you had a chance to look at this bill yet, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I will be very interested in what the final language looks like and what we see in committee. Those bills have a tendency to have surprise amendments that change them drastically. So withholding kind of final judgment on it, what I would say is I have stood firm that healthcare decisions should be between doctors and the people getting the healthcare procedures, doctors and the families of those who are getting healthcare procedures. And in this particular instance, these procedures, when medically necessary, should be carried out like all other medical procedures. And we really, this state has taken a wild turn for a conservative state to, over the last 3 cycles, we've had 3 major legislative efforts to put government in the hospital room between the doctor and the patient. I'll continue to oppose those efforts. I don't believe this is necessary or right, and I would like to see, whether it be in these cases in this particular bill or others, that the patient and the doctor and the medical professionals who are trained and experts in these procedures make those decisions, and let's keep government out of the bedrooms and out of hospital rooms.
Another bill in that same area, I guess you might say, was House Bill 1569. It would limit transgender care for prisoners. You voted against that one. What are your feelings on that?
Again, first of all, we don't have any examples in the state of Indiana of this occurring. And so sometimes in politics, I know this will shock your viewers, but every once in a while there's a bill filed that's more of a statement bill or intended to raise money from the political bases. And I view this bill in that kind of camp. What I'll say about this is exactly what I said about the last bill. Let's let the healthcare providers and the experts and the doctors and their patients make medical decisions for those patients, and let's not have government come in between a doctor and their patient.
Well, while we're in the area of healthcare, as ranking minority leader on the Employment, Labor, and Pensions Committee, you've been handed Senate Bill 7, which will eliminate physician non-compete agreements. What are your thoughts on that idea?
Sure, and you know, it's a complicated issue and kind of an interesting issue, and one that I think is appropriate for the legislature. However, I end up supporting this particular piece of legislation. The reason why there's some ambiguity to it is because I haven't seen the final language yet. However, what I would say is Senate Bill 7 and non-competes for physicians can be important in a town like Evansville, where one of our hospitals may bring in a physician from across the country and spend a lot of money on that physician and invest in that physician, advertise for that physician to gain patients and so on and so forth. And so I certainly believe that contracts that doctors and hospitals work out should be left to them, that they're both very capable and capable of contracting services between each other. But we can't allow the hospitals to have a non-compete forever and ever and ever and keep that doctor from ever leaving. And
perhaps we should spell out for folks who don't know, a non-compete agreement is something that a person would have to sign that says, if you leave us and you can't go to another place in the area for 6 months or a year, or that kind of thing, correct?
That's right. And to my knowledge and my understanding in working with the hospitals and with the physicians, our hospitals here in southern Indiana and Evansville, predominantly, we have two of them in Evansville, are good actors in this space and are doing the right thing and are able to negotiate these contracts in a reasonable manner. There is a hospital up north who it sounds like their contracts are perhaps unreasonable and put the doctors in a bad position. And what happens is if the doctor is unable to continue to work in that hospital but then can't go anywhere near that hospital, say within 100 miles for 5-10 years, then the patients also lose out. So there needs to be a middle ground, and we'll continue to work on Senate Bill 7. I hope that it'll be in a shape that I can support.
Yeah. We mentioned some bills moving through in a number of conservative states in the U.S. Here in Indiana, House Bill 1608 says K through 3 graders cannot be instructed on human sexuality. As I understand it, you voted against that. What are your concerns on that bill?
Yeah, I think that bill could be interpreted to disenfranchise children in the school whose families include same-sex marriages. And I'll just say it, when a second grader comes to school with 2 dads or 2 moms, I want that second grader to be just as proud of his or her family as anybody else is. And we need not disenfranchise those students or in some way make them feel like, well, we can't talk about, Johnny's parents or family or home life because he may have 2 moms or 2 dads. But, let's talk about Susie because they have a traditional mom and dad at home. And I think it's a dangerous road to go down. And I said this when I was here with you last time, John, I'm going to say it again. I don't understand and am so disheartened and saddened by the Republican effort to disenfranchise and pick on LGBTQ Hoosiers. And this is another bill of a dozen or so bills filed this year, and many that are moving and have passed the House or Senate that disenfranchise LGBTQ Hoosiers. I'll continue to stand with them. And when a second grader goes to school with two moms or two dads, I hope that we can celebrate that family the same way that my daughters will be celebrated for their family.
All right, well, let's move on to a Senate bill that's in the House now. Senate Bill 161. It passed without opposition in the Senate. It would make tracking someone with an electronic device a felony. It's directed mostly toward people with protective orders against them. You mentioned you're a former prosecutor. Have you been able to look at this bill yet? What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, I've seen it as it's come over. I'll continue to watch it through the process and see what the final language is. What I would say about it is, Apple now makes a tracking device. I think there's a lot of companies that make $10, $20 devices that you can put on vehicles or in purses or pockets and to use to be tracking someone. While the technology is neat and it might be useful, say for your kids in their young ages, it's not appropriate when adults are using it to harass or stalk someone. And so there needs to be a middle ground. We need to make sure we're keeping people safe. And if it sounds to me like Apple has created a solution for this, and that it notifies you. John, if I were to leave an Apple tag with you today, eventually you would get notified by Apple that I'm tracking you. I think that solutions like that one are good. Whether or not this bill is the solution yet, I'll withhold judgment until I see it in its final stages.
House Bill 1342 would create what's called a direct support professional registry. It passed the House unanimously, as I understand it. Can you tell us a little more about that? What are the benefits of having such a registry?
Yeah, our direct support employees have often, help have oftentimes gone with little pay and done really important work around children and students and so.
And what kind of workers are we talking about?
Direct support and oftentimes work with people with disabilities and disabled Hoosiers. And this bill will, I think, help create a system in which we support them and know where they are and are able to foster an environment that's more supportive in the state of Indiana.
Yeah. Well, in the couple of minutes we have left here, what are some other bills that are progressing that you think are of interest, that you think folks should know about?
Yeah, the big one, other than the budget, as this is a budget year, and certainly the funding is one of the more important aspects of this session, are the health care bills. There's one in the Senate, one in the House, and it is my goal over the next 7 weeks to work every single day to make sure that we have a health care bill that is focused on Hoosier patients rather than a war between the hospitals and the insurance companies. Too often in the state legislature right now, we take a bill and we act and pretend as if it's about the patient or about the constituent, and really it's about the special interest that are making money off the system. And so,
and I guess that would be the hospitals and insurance companies?
In this case, it's the hospitals and the insurance companies. And I've been disappointed thus far in the debate around healthcare this session because we've heard a lot about the hospitals, we've heard more about the insurers, and there aren't very many people talking about the patient. And so in this particular bill, I'm unhappy with the cost that it would be to our hospitals. I think you'll see hospitals close. I think you'll see rural hospitals close. I think it'll put Deaconess and St. Vincent, Evansville in really tough spots financially. And I think it's a huge windfall for the insurer providers. And so I hope to see major changes to the health care bills. I was the only Democrat that voted against it in committee when it was in public health. And I hope that the final product will keep the patient in mind.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. State Legislator Ryan Hatfield, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for joining us. I'm John Gibson of WNIN. Thanks for watching WNIN Lawmakers.